Hey, what's up? What's going on out there? I'm going to check out this video with Thomas Sowell. He's going to be talking about the history of slavery and why it's hidden and not really talked about in schools. So I'm going to check out the video and see what he's talking about.
Tom, reparations. We began by talking about disparate impact, the idea that discrimination is so deeply embedded in the American experience that it can take place even in the absence of an intention to discriminate. So this argument, which is that there's some basic flaw or sin that's still with us, comes up in the case for reparations. Longish quotation, but it sets something up. But from Ta-Nehisi Coates in an article in The Atlantic entitled "The Case for Reparations." White supremacy is not merely the work of hot-headed demagogues, but a force so fundamental to America that it is difficult to imagine the country without it. And so we must imagine a new country. Reparations is the price we must pay to see ourselves squarely. The wealth gap merely puts a number on something we feel but cannot say, that American prosperity was ill-gotten and selective in its distribution. What I'm talking about is more than recompense for past injustices. What I'm talking about is a national reckoning that would lead to spiritual renewal, close quote. And
all right, before Mr. Sowell goes, the quote that Coates just gave, I don't know why so-called black people think that we're going to be made whole by reparations in America. And if that moment were to happen, we're just, all of a sudden, everybody's just going to be sing Kumbaya and just be so happy. That's not going to happen.
Tom Sowell makes what of that?
Well, it tells me that I've made the right decision not to read The Atlantic for decades. Slavery is a very big subject. I have in my home an entire bookcase of books about slavery in various parts of the world and various times of history. And the sad fact is that slavery has been a universal institution for thousands of years.
Yeah, to his point, I'm just going to use the Ottoman Empire for example. They used so-called white Mamluk soldiers and something called Janissary soldiers, like young Eastern European children that they converted to soldiers, and that's where you get the terms like Slavic and things like that from. So basically, that term is from that slave Slavic.
As far back as you can trace human history. And what we're looking at is if slavery is something that happened to one race of people in one country, when in fact the spread of it was around the world. In 1776, which is when Adam Smith published The Wealth of Nations, as well as when the United States got started, he said that Western Europe is the only place in the world where there is no slavery. And even the Western Europeans had vast numbers of slaves in the Western Hemisphere.
Yes.
But not in Western Europe itself. And so if you're going to have reparations for slavery, it's going to be the greatest transfer of wealth back and forth, and between and cross-hauling, as they say in the railroads, because the number of whites, for example, who were enslaved in North Africa by the Barbary pirates exceeded the number of Africans enslaved in the United States and in the American colonies before that, put together. But nobody is going to North Africa to ask for reparations because nobody is going to be fool enough to give it to them. Here we have intellectuals who can imagine a different history from the rest of the world, even though it's so similar to the rest of the world.
Yeah, to his point, I mean, he brought up some great points. Again, so-called black people are not going to be made whole with reparations. The only reparations that we're going to have is turning back to the Most High. And the good men and good women out there know what I'm talking about. This country is not your rest. So we have to treat it accordingly. You know, we have to get what we can get out of this country and move on. Because putting your faith in your so-called enemy isn't going to get you anywhere. Begging and pleading from somebody to give you something that's done you wrong, it's kind of asinine to me, honestly. But to Mr. Sowell's point, that practice has been going on for thousands of years. And actually, when I think about it, a case that was in America, I think it was like the mid 1600s, maybe early 1600s. It was a black guy, Anthony Johnson. He actually had an indentured servant he wouldn't release out of his contract, and he ended up being enslaved to him for the rest of his life. And I think that was like one of the first instances where like you can be enslaved for the remainder of your life in America, like one of the judgments. Um, but my point basically saying that is like black people owned slaves back then too, so it wasn't like some abnormal thing. Slavery really didn't become racialized in the U.S. until I want to say maybe the mid 1700s, that it really became a black and white issue. But before then, not as much. It was more so like indentured servitude and and yeah, pretty much like indentured servitude and slavery too. Sorry about that, but it didn't become what it became until like later on at a later date, maybe like hundreds of years later. But yeah, that's my 1-2 about it. Let me know what you think. Drop a comment.